A guy I knew, call him Dave, retired to Sarasota, Florida in 2021, bought a beautiful condo, walking distance from the beach, posted those sunset photos everyone's seen 1,000 times. 6 months later, he's paying $18,000 a year in homeowner association fees. His property insurance jumped from $2,200 to $7,400 after the carrier dropped him. And he discovered that walking distance from the beach meant walking distance from a beach that gets overrun by spring breakers for 3 months straight. He sold at a $40,000 loss and moved back with his daughter in Tacoma. Another couple, friends of my accountant, retired to Phoenix. Great house, swimming pool, the whole southwestern aesthetic. They didn't account for the fact that their electric bill in July and August would hit $500 a month. They also didn't account for the fact that being 68 years old in 115-degree heat isn't character building anymore. It's a legitimate health risk. They lasted 2 summers. And here's my favorite. A retired software engineer I met through a forum moved to Bend, Oregon, thinking he'd found paradise. Beautiful mountains, craft beer scene, hiking trails everywhere. What he didn't calculate was that Bend sits at 3,600 feet elevation, gets 150 inches of snow some winters, and the nearest major hospital is a 2-hour drive away in Portland. His wife fell on ice their first January. Ambulance ride cost them $4,200 out of pocket because the local hospital wasn't in their Medicare Advantage network. That paradise cost them $31,000 in the first year. Here's the punchline question. Why do smart people keep making the same expensive mistakes with retirement locations? I'm going to explain exactly where retirees actually thrive in the Pacific Northwest, why the conventional wisdom about retirement locations is mostly marketing nonsense, and by the end, you'll understand the 7 towns that actually make sense when you run the real numbers. But first, we need to talk about why everyone's mental model of retirement relocation is fundamentally broken. The thesis here is simple. A retirement location is a tax strategy disguised as a lifestyle choice, and most people treat it like a vacation decision. That mismatch between how people choose and what actually matters is where fortunes get quietly evaporated. Let me give you a framework. Imagine your retirement location is an employee you're hiring for a 20-year contract. You can't fire this employee easily. They control massive portions of your monthly budget, and their performance directly impacts your health, your social life, and your net worth. Would you hire that employee based on a 3-day vacation visit and some brochures? Of course not. You'd do a background check, examine their financials, interview people who've worked with them. But that's exactly what retirees do with relocation. They vacation somewhere, fall in love with the vibe, and make a 6-figure commitment based on feelings. This employee metaphor is going to come back throughout this. Keep it in your head. Now let's talk about the Pacific Northwest specifically. I know what you're thinking. Rain, gray skies, expensive, Seattle prices. And sure, if you're looking at Seattle proper or Portland's Pearl District, you're absolutely right. A modest home in Seattle's nicer neighborhoods will run you $850,000 to $1.2 million. That's not retirement math for most people. That's, I founded a successful startup math. But here's where it gets interesting. The Pacific Northwest has this strange geographic feature that most people don't understand until they live there. It's called the Olympic rain shadow, and it creates a band of land that gets dramatically less rainfall than Seattle while staying in Washington's tax structure. Sequim, Washington sits in this shadow and gets 16 inches of rain per year. Seattle gets 37 inches. Same state, same tax advantages, dramatically different weather experience. This is escalation number 1. The weather assumption is wrong. But you might be thinking, okay, less rain, great, but Washington has that whole no state income tax thing going for it. That's the real benefit. And you're not wrong. Washington is one of 7 states with 0 state income tax. For a retiree drawing down 401k distributions, that matters. If you're pulling out $80,000 a year from tax-deferred accounts, living in California costs you about $6,400 in state income tax. Living in Oregon costs you about $6,800. Living in Washington costs you zero. But here's where you need to pay attention. Washington has a 7% sales tax and some of the highest gas prices in the nation. Oregon has no sales tax, but high property taxes and that state income tax. The math only works if you understand your specific spending pattern. If you're drawing down huge 401k balances and not buying much stuff, Washington wins. If you're spending a lot on goods and have modest retirement income, Oregon's no sales tax structure might actually come out ahead. This is escalation number 2. The tax advantage depends entirely on your specific situation, and anyone giving you a blanket "Washington is better for taxes" recommendation doesn't understand the math. Now you're asking yourself, fine, but what about cost of living generally? The Pacific Northwest is expensive. That's what everyone says. My sister visited Seattle once and paid $14 for a burger. How is that affordable for retirees? Here's the thing, averages are lies. Averages are where truth goes to die. The median home price in Seattle is $830,000. The median home price in Aberdeen, Washington, 45 minutes west, is $215,000. Same state, same tax structure, same access to Washington's healthcare and infrastructure. One is a global tech hub with bidding wars on fixer-upper homes. The other is a former lumber town that most people drive past on their way to the coast. And before you dismiss Aberdeen as some declining Rust Belt nightmare, understand that many smaller Pacific Northwest towns have been quietly gentrifying as remote workers discovered they could live somewhere beautiful for a quarter of Seattle prices. The infrastructure is there, the healthcare is there. The cost is simply different by an order of magnitude. This is escalation number 3. Geographic arbitrage within the same state is the hidden game. But now we need to talk about something that nobody puts in the brochures: healthcare access in retirement. This is where it gets really interesting. I want to tell you a story about a man named Robert. Never met him personally, but his case showed up in a study I read about retirement relocations. Robert was a retired accountant from Chicago who moved to a beautiful small town in coastal Oregon. Great property prices, charming downtown, close to the ocean. He figured healthcare would be fine. He was 67, in good health. What could go wrong? 18 months after moving, Robert was diagnosed with a heart condition that required a specialist. Nearest cardiologist was 90 minutes away. Nearest major medical center was in Portland, 2.5 hours each way. The local hospital didn't have the equipment he needed. Robert spent the next 3 years driving 5 hours round trip for regular appointments. When he eventually needed surgery, he had to temporarily relocate to Portland for 6 weeks. Robert's beautiful, affordable house became a prison. His retirement paradise meant that his wife spent those same years as his chauffeur and caretaker. The money he saved on property prices was quietly eaten by travel costs, temporary housing, and the massive hidden cost of spending your retirement managing logistics instead of living. This is escalation number 4. The healthcare proximity problem is real, and it compounds as you age. Now let me give you the 7 towns, and I want you to think about each one as that employee we discussed earlier. Each has different strengths, different weaknesses, different ways they'll handle your money and your life for those 20 years. Town number 1, Bellingham, Washington. Population about 90,000, located 90 minutes north of Seattle, 30 minutes south of the Canadian border. Bellingham sits in this interesting sweet spot, big enough to have a regional hospital, a state university, and actual infrastructure. Small enough that median home prices sit around $550,000, which for the Pacific Northwest is reasonable. The university gives the town cultural life that most retirement destinations lack. You've got theater. You've got lectures. You've got the energy of younger people that keeps things from becoming a retirement graveyard. The airport has direct flights to Seattle and beyond, which matters more than you think when you're 75 and don't want to drive 2 hours to catch a flight. Tax structure is Washington's zero state income tax, but you're paying for it in sales tax and slightly higher property taxes than the national average. Town number 2, Sequim, Washington. Remember the rain shadow I mentioned? This is it. Sequim gets 16 inches of rain per year, has a population of about 8,000 in town, but 30,000 in the broader area, and sits exactly between the Olympic Mountains and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Median home price is around $440,000. Here's what matters though. Sequim has become a retirement destination for people who know about the rain shadow. That means healthcare infrastructure has been built to serve an aging population. The local hospital has expanded its cardiology and oncology departments specifically because of who lives there now. When you're choosing an employee for 20 years, you want one who's already adapted to serve customers like you. Sequim has done that. Town number 3. Port Angeles, Washington. Same rain shadow, different vibe. Port Angeles is slightly larger than Sequim, about 20,000 people, and sits right on the water with ferry access to Victoria, British Columbia. Median home price around $380,000. Here's the trade-off. Port Angeles is more isolated than Bellingham. You're 2.5 hours from Seattle by car, assuming the Hood Canal Bridge isn't delayed, which it often is. But for some retirees, that isolation is a feature, not a bug. Property crime rates are lower, cost of living is lower. You're trading proximity to a major city for affordability and quiet. Town number 4. Olympia, Washington. State capital, population about 55,000. Median home price around $480,000. Olympia is interesting because it's a government town. That sounds boring, and in some ways it is. But government towns have stable employment, which means stable local economies, which means your property values don't swing wildly based on some tech company's hiring decisions. Olympia is close enough to Seattle and Tacoma for major medical care, has its own regional hospital, and sits at the southern end of Puget Sound. The downside is traffic. Olympia sits on the I-5 corridor, and traffic through town can be genuinely terrible. You're not paying Seattle prices, but you're dealing with some Seattle-style infrastructure problems. Town number 5, Vancouver, Washington. Not Canada. This Vancouver sits right across the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon. Population about 190,000. Median home price around $460,000. Vancouver is the ultimate tax arbitrage play. You live in Washington, pay 0 state income tax, and drive across the river to shop in Oregon, paying 0 sales tax. It's the best of both tax worlds, assuming you structure your spending correctly. The proximity to Portland means world-class healthcare access. Oregon Health and Science University is a teaching hospital that handles complex cases that smaller regional hospitals can't touch. You're also getting Portland's cultural amenities without Portland's housing costs or Portland's traffic. The trade-off is that Vancouver is a suburb. It doesn't have its own distinct identity the way Bellingham or Port Angeles do. If you want a charming downtown and local character, you might find Vancouver underwhelming. But you might be thinking, wait, what about Oregon? You've given me 5 Washington towns and 1 mention of Vancouver as a Portland adjacency play. What if I want actual Oregon? Fair question. Let's talk about town number 6. Ashland, Oregon. Population about 21,000, located in southern Oregon, just north of the California border. Median home price around $520,000, which sounds high until you understand what you're buying. Ashland is home to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, one of the largest regional theaters in the country. It's a university town, Southern Oregon University, with all the cultural and infrastructure benefits that brings. It's in the Rogue Valley, which means warmer summers and milder winters than the coastal towns. The tax situation is Oregon's, which means state income tax on your 401k distributions, but no sales tax. Here's the healthcare angle. Asante Rogue Regional Medical Center in nearby Medford is a Level 2 trauma center with full cardiology, oncology, and neurology departments. You're 20 minutes from serious medical care, not 2 hours. The trade-off is that Ashland has become popular with wealthy California refugees. Prices have been bid up. You're competing with people who sold houses in San Francisco or Los Angeles and have cash offers. Town number 7, Hood River, Oregon. Population about 8,000. Median home price around $580,000. Hood River sits in the Columbia River Gorge, about an hour east of Portland. It's a windsurfing destination, a craft beer destination, and an outdoor recreation paradise. The healthcare situation is trickier. The local hospital can handle basics, but anything complex requires the drive to Portland. What Hood River offers is quality of life that's genuinely rare. You've got mountains, you've got the river, you've got a walkable downtown with actual restaurants that aren't just chains. The question is whether that lifestyle premium is worth the healthcare trade-off and the price premium. For some retirees, absolutely. For others, it's a decision they'd regret by year 5. Now I want to give you a concrete scenario with real numbers, because abstract advice is worthless. Let's compare two fictional but realistic retirees. Couple A retires with $900,000 in retirement accounts and plans to draw down $72,000 a year. They choose Sarasota, Florida because they vacation there and love the beach. Here's their first-year math. Federal taxes on their distribution, roughly $8,900. Florida has no state income tax, so zero there. Property taxes on their $450,000 condo, about $4,300. Homeowner insurance in Florida's current market, $6,800 if they can get it. Homeowner association fees, $8,400. Basic living expenses, groceries, utilities, gas, about $28,000. Healthcare premiums and out-of-pocket costs, assuming they're 65 and on Medicare with a supplement, about $6,500. Total fixed costs, $54,900. That leaves $17,100 for discretionary spending. Travel, dining out, hobbies, gifts for grandkids. Not bad. Couple B has identical finances and chooses Sequim, Washington. Here's their math. Federal taxes, same $8,900. Washington state income tax, zero. Property taxes on their $440,000 home, about $3,900. Homeowner insurance, about $1,400. No homeowner association fees for many Sequim properties. Basic living expenses, about $31,000, slightly higher than Florida due to electricity costs in winter. Healthcare, about $5,200, slightly lower due to better local access, meaning fewer travel costs for appointments. Total fixed costs, $45,400. That leaves $26,600 for discretionary spending. Couple B has 56% more discretionary income than Couple A. Over a 20-year retirement, that compounds to a 6-figure difference in lifestyle quality. Same starting assets, different outcomes, purely based on location choice. Now, here's a quick comedic cutaway. I once talked to a financial advisor who specialized in retirement relocations. He told me his clients fell into two categories: people who did the math first, and people who called him 18 months later saying, "I made a horrible mistake. What do I do now?" The second category was larger. And another thing. Have you noticed that every retirement destination ad shows happy couples walking on beaches? Nobody's advertising, "Come to our town. The property taxes are reasonable and the hospital has a good cardiology department." That would be honest marketing. That's why it doesn't exist. Now you're asking yourself, what are the practical takeaways? How do I actually make this decision without becoming a cautionary tale? Here's takeaway number 1. Spend a month, minimum, in your chosen town before you commit. Not a vacation month, a living month. Go to the grocery store. Find the nearest hospital and drive there at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Look at property tax records for homes you're considering. Check whether that charming downtown is actually walkable, or if you'll be driving everywhere. A month of real living tells you more than a year of vacation visits. Takeaway number 2. Calculate your specific tax situation. Pull out last year's spending, last year's retirement account distributions, and run the numbers for both states. Washington versus Oregon isn't an abstract preference. It's a specific math problem based on your income sources and your spending patterns. The difference between the two states can be $5,000 a year or $500 a year, depending entirely on your situation. Takeaway number 3. Prioritize healthcare access over lifestyle aesthetics. I know that sounds boring. Nobody daydreams about being close to a good hospital. But here's the uncomfortable truth. After age 70, your healthcare needs expand dramatically. A town that's beautiful, but 90 minutes from serious medical care becomes less beautiful every year. The towns I've highlighted, all 7, have either strong local healthcare or close proximity to major medical centers. That's not a coincidence. That's the most important selection criteria. The hook I opened with asked why smart people keep making expensive mistakes with retirement locations. The answer is that they're optimizing for the wrong things. They're optimizing for vacation memories and lifestyle fantasies, instead of the boring structural factors that determine quality of life over decades. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do. 99% of people choose retirement locations based on 3-day visits and emotional resonance. The 1% do the math, check the healthcare, calculate the taxes, and spend a month actually living there before they sign anything. Be in the 1%.